First of all, hello everyone. My name is Aaron, and I work in the capacity of a category manager at Pact. And today, I'd really like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you, wherever you're joining us from, that is. Sun Tzu once said, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the results of 100 battles. Using this approach, it becomes imperative to not only know the adversaries, but also understand your current security posture and how to enhance it. In this line, our topic for today's talk is enhance your cybersecurity posture to handle current threats. I'm very pleased to be able to introduce you to Yuri and Erdal, who will be taking us through today's session. To briefly talk a bit about both of them to you, Yuri is a professor at the EC Council University for the master's degree in cybersecurity program and the Bachelor of Science in Cybersecurity. Prior to working on this team at Microsoft, he worked as a writer for the Windows security team and support escalation engineer at CSS Security Forefront team. Yuri is a senior member of the ISSA Fort Worth chapter and a writer for the ISSA Journal. Erdal is an award-winning speaker and a technical expert in worldwide conferences such as Microsoft Ignite, that's TechEd, Hacker Halted, eCrime Congress, and Microsoft Management Summit. He's been awarded as the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional from Microsoft since 2008, the best speaker at Microsoft TechEd, and he's also won Global Instructor Award and Circle of Excellence Award from the EC Council. At the end of this session, there'll be a short question and answer session that you can take part in as well. So during that time, we'll let you know beforehand. You can drop in your questions using the chat window that you all have, and I will read them out to Yuri and Erdal so that they can answer. So that's it from me for now. Yuri and Erdal, I'm going to hand over to you now. Please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you for the intro. My name is Yuri Diogenes. I think the introduction was done already. The other thing that I would like to emphasize is that recently, Erdal and I, we released the Cyber Security Attack and Defense Strategy book, which is available by PAC, worldwide ebook and paperback. Erdal?
Yes, a quick update from me as well. I'm also a lecturer at Australian Charles Sturt University. And I'm not an MVP anymore. I'm now a Microsoft employee. So you cannot be an MVP and Microsoft employee. Saying that today, this is a personal interaction with you, our listeners, and I'm great to be in front of you.
All right, so let's take on. We have a very packed agenda. The first part of this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the current threats, and that's the time average that we're going to spend on this. Let's talk about the lessons objectives for this first part, which is to understand the current information in security threat landscape, understand why the identity is the new perimeter, and learn a little bit more about your security posture. Before we talk about current security threat landscape, is important some important statistics regarding attacks that were already growing over the past 2 years. So if we look, for example, on the left side, when we talk about weaponizing the cloud, the use of cloud computing to weaponize VMs is a fast and growing trend because many times customers are missing secure hygiene on those resources that they have in the cloud. So they move resources to the cloud, and they sometimes do not take care of basic stuff. That's the main reality. And when we are dealing with infrastructure as a service, the customer is still the owner of that resource. So he needs to take care of the secure posture of those VMs that he is moving to the cloud. This diagram is from Microsoft Security Intelligence Report, CERT 22 from January to March 2017. And as you can see here, as far as attack, the vast majority of the attacks by weaponizing the clouds is via RDP brute force, which is kind of expected, as I said, because customers move VMs to the cloud. They leave RDP port wide open all the time, and there is not hygiene to close those ports when they are not using. So the cloud weaponized threat scenario, what happens is the attacker establish a foothold within a cloud infrastructure by compromising just one VM, and then taking control of all the VMs by doing lateral movement. The attacker can then use these VMs to launch attacks against other infrastructures, such as a brute force attack against other tenants and other VMs in different cloud providers as well. So that's a very serious type of situation, but it's also easy to resolve many times with basic key security aspects, secure hygiene, secure controls. When a virtual machine is compromised, it sometimes tries to also talk with command and control, and that's why we also have the communication with malicious IP as half of the diagram, pretty much 51%, because once the machine is compromised, the next step on the attack campaign many times is to talk with command and control. So that's also another aspect that you have to take in consideration. Regarding ransomware, I think that this is on the news all the time, is another growing trend. And so there is nothing new, because if we look back to 2016, for example, the FBI estimated that we had an average of 4,000 ransomware attacks a day back in 2016. But it was really in 2017 that we saw ransomware gaining mainstream with big hits such as WannaCry, Pitya, NotPetya. In June 2017, for example, there were 12,000 machines that were compromised with ransomware over 64 countries. So it was the biggest hit, and it was also the most mainstream type of attack that we had. One particular observation regarding the evolution of ransomware is if we look to last year Pitya attack, because Pitya had worm capabilities, which allows this type of ransomware to move laterally. It was one of the first ones to use lateral movement across infected networks and kind of a worm approach that was able to spread it out real quick. The way that Pitya ransomware leveraged this functionality, it was by many different methods. By stealing credentials, reusing existing active sections, using file share to transfer the malicious file across different machines in the same network, using legitimate functionalities to execute the payload, or abusing SMB vulnerabilities for unpatched machines. So this is just some important considerations regarding ransomware. And this, again, this is not something really new, but it's something that is growing from the past 2 years, and will continue to grow moving forward. Now that we had this kind of background of things that were important previously, we can talk a little bit more about some of the current challenges that we have to deal with. And before we talk about CAS, Cybercrime as a Service, let's just step back and talk about the cybercrime itself. Cybercrime is growing because cybercrime operates in scale. The amount of malicious activity is staggering. One major internet provider report that it sees an average of 80 billion malicious scans a day, which is a result of automated efforts by cybercriminals to identify vulnerable targets. So there is a lot of activity, there is a lot of investment going on in this area. And another important aspect regarding cybercrime is that it adopts new technology in a faster pace than most of the enterprise. So the malware writing is becoming fully automated. The use of Tor to preserve anonymity is highly used, and to allow also quick distribution. That goes a little bit of what its CAS is about, the Cybercrime as a Service. If we look again back a little bit, we step back and we look to previous years. In 2015, the Deputy Director of the UK National Cybercrime Unit stated that law enforcement believed that much of the CAS economy built into only 100 to 200 people back in 2015. And these individuals were profiting most of the economy, cybercrime economy. One research group found that some cyber criminals can make more than 100,000 a year just by selling ransomware kit, malware kit, and things like that. So there is a lot of investment also in things like research as a service. So it's another category that we have, the research as a service, where you can just pretty much pay an individual to do some research in raw material that can be used later on for some cyber criminal activities. And on the right side of the slide, you had some statistics from Ponemon Institute LLC, 11.7 million average annualized cost for cybercrime, the percentage increase in costs and all that. So these are just some numbers just to highlight the real threat and the real value that we have today with cybercrime. And again, the use of cloud capabilities just enhance that, because it now helps cybercrime to fast evolve from one machine to many machines. It leverage the power of cloud computing also to process and to automate malware distribution and research. All right, so going to the other important aspects of this, what we have is 50 days is the average time to resolve malicious insiders attack. But the most alarming thing is 23 days average time to resolve a ransomware attack. So it takes a long time to resolve a problem. And that's why you need to enhance your detections capability, which is part of the three major pillars, the protection, the detection, and the response. When we see things like 23 days average to resolve an attack, what we are pretty much saying here is that our detection mechanism is not very good in identifying new threats. And just going back to the cyber criminal activities, there is another diagram here, also from Ponemon Institute, from the 2017 cost of cybercrime study, that shows the average cost per country comparing 2016 to 2017. And you can see that is growing. There is nothing actually reducing here. Every single country is spending more when the subject is cybercrime. So that's also an alarming reality that we have. What we have to really focus on is this growing trend of things. The RAS, ransomware as a service, again, using cloud capabilities to fast deliver the agents and all. Also, cybercrime is going after cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency is used by cyber criminals to exchange or buy services and products. And the fact that it's difficult to track cryptocurrency, it also makes a very attractive for cyber criminals to use. That means that the number of attacks that involve cryptocurrency miners will only increase over time, and will allow cyber criminals to earn additional money by hijacking and controlling devices. It's also important to emphasize that this is a growing area because cryptocurrency exchange is still not very mature from the security perspective. And although there is the perception of secure by default, reality is showing that it doesn't really work that way. Even mobile devices are not immune to crypto mining. Recently, we have some study around that. The Trojanized apps, for example, was a mine code and crypto mining in Android platform. So to remember that any device that has processing power is actually could be a potential victim of this type of attack. IoT is another thing that it is taking place from the attack and threat landscape perspective. Telnet, brute force attack are some of the methods that are using to hijack Internet of Things device, IoT device, which means that your smart home, your wearable device, or any other type of device that is IoT aware can be controlled at some point by cyber criminals. There is a huge challenge here to manage the secure state of those IoT devices. There is a huge challenge because there are so many platforms, so many vendors, and still we do not have a cohesive, secure blueprint to apply as a foundation of protection for those IoT devices. So many times you use best practice from one vendor, best practice from another vendor, and the gap in between those still exists. In 2017, for example, the Mirai and Brickabot IoT campaign were used heavily for IP-enabled cameras and home device targeting, Twitter, Spotify, GitHub. So that was probably the main mainstream campaign that we saw in 2017 with a lot of coverage from the press and a lot of devices that were compromised and hijacked by these attacks. Bot news and propaganda, also known as the fake news. And although that a lot of folks are taking this not too seriously from the information security perspective because they view this as more a political aspect, there are a lot of things that you gotta actually be more conscious about those campaigns. Social media and news environment will play a crucial role in misinformation and propaganda, and it did, and it's been growing since the United States elections in 2016. In 2017, we have reports where Russian threat actors were involving in buying Facebook's ads to publish propaganda. And Facebook had a major reorganization on those on how to operate with those ads. So Facebook is not on a platform for being used for users, but is also a propaganda platform. And when you hijack and you are able to infiltrate on that platform to plant false propaganda, then you are leading users to believe on something or to click on something. There are many attacks going on through the Facebook private message, for example, where users are enticed to click on something and then hijack and compromise their machine. But before I move on, I just want to also emphasize that let's not forget the old ways to gain access to the system, such as phishing email, mobile malware, and things like that. We are talking about current methods that are a growing trend on the threat landscape, but we should never forget about the old-fashioned way to compromise a machine, which is a phishing email. Is still a very effective way to compromise. And many times it's because a conjunction of factors, such as lack of secure awareness from the users. Users, many times, they know what to do, but they are not well trained to identify a phishing email or a phishing campaign, and they will click on things that they are not supposed to click. And many times technology will not be enough to stop users from click on things. So that's where security awareness training, continuously internal campaigns within the organization to educate the users on security is very important. Most of the enterprise, they have security awareness trainings like once a year. But if you want to take this really a step further, you should have refresh security awareness training or refresh campaigns every quarter with news regarding security. Your users should be an advocate of security within your company. When we say identity is your new perimeter, it is not only a marketing saying. The reality is that when you go to the identity space, you have tons of opportunities to do malicious activity. And these are just some of the highlights that we had in 2017, the Equifax data breach, the Uber data breach, the Yahoo, and everything evolves around identity, credentials, because attackers, they really want to gain access to the identity and play as a legitimate user. Because once they have an identity, once they compromise an identity, they are able to establish a foothold within the network. Well, now it's become way easier to escalate privilege and to do other things. So it's very important that you have the old, but again, still effective way to do defense in depth approach. The only difference now is that you're going to do defense in depth approach using different technologies to protect just one aspect of your infrastructure. So it's not only defense in depth from the infrastructure perspective, it's also defense in depth from the subject perspective. The subject in this case is the user identity. I want to protect the user identity, which means that I have to have different mechanisms to protect that. It's not only about strong password. It's about policy enforcement. It's about multi-factor authentication, continuous monitoring, because continuous monitoring is about having detection mechanism that will quickly tell you that a user identity was compromised. And when we add multiple devices able to access user identity, like mobile device, laptops, and we also have different platforms, on-premise resources, cloud resources. Now we have just different ways to compromise you. So you have to plan your identity posture by adding different layers of protection. Very important. Do not focus only in one thing. Focus in multiple layers of protection for user's identity. Because again, if the identity is compromised, it's basically game over for the most part. Once you are inside of the network, it becomes way easier to keep compromising other things. So that leads us to the major pillar about secure posture, right? So what we show throughout those slides so far is that there are many ways to hack into your system. So you need to have those three major pillars: protection, detection, and response. Protection is about keeping everything that you have protected, and which means enhance your secure policy and actually enforce your security policy. Many organizations, they have security policy in place, but they do not enforce, as everything is on paper. If you do not enforce, it is really not going to happen. It's not going to change anything. So you need to have policy enforcement and auditing, right? Because if you do not understand if you are compliant with something or not, maybe you are failing due diligence on your process. Restrict the use of privileged accounts. That's very, very, very important. The old days that each user was the administrator of their own machine is over. You cannot afford to have users being the administrator of their own machine. Even if the account is local, if it is a local account, it's not a domain account, it doesn't matter. Because if I have privileged access to your workstation, I have much more capability to launch different attacks and to escalate privilege. So you gotta reduce users' privilege as much as you can in all workstations. Not only in workstations where administrators will have access, but in all workstations. You have to have vulnerability management in place. If you look back to 2017 threat landscape with WannaCry, Pitya, we are talking about a threat that was fixed at some point 3 months prior to being exploited. And most of the machines that were infected were missing an update. And it looks like we really haven't learned from our lessons back in 2009 with Configure, when it was exploiting, again, a known vulnerability. So time is showing that we are making similar mistakes over time. And this mistake is basically vulnerability management. If for your organization, it takes more than a month to update the system, that's a very serious issue that you have to address right away. So you need to enhance your vulnerability management campaign and your vulnerability management resources within your organization. Hardening although is a trivial thing to do, still many organizations do not do a good job in hardening their systems. And by hardening, I mean leverage whitelist and all capabilities that are built into the platform that allows you to strict access to some of the resources, installation of programs and things like that. Another basic component is anti-malware. Make sure to have anti-malware not only fully up to date, but anti-malware that has capabilities to identify things based on behavior and not only on signatures. And last but not least, from the protection perspective, you have the security awareness training, which is something very important. I already mentioned before, if your users are not well educated in doing a good job by managing their own resources, the chances are that they will be compromised. And this actually increases a lot with BYOD. When you have BYOD in the scene, you are just increasing the likelihood that the user will be compromised, because now he has a device that he owns and he is installing all the applications that he believes are necessary to his personal use and things like that. So just make sure that when you are talking about BYOD, you also cover the aspects of secure hygiene within the user's device. Detection. So detection is primordial nowadays. Again, if it takes 23 days for you to detect that machines within your organization were compromised, then you have a huge problem in your hands at that point. It shows that the detection pillar within your organization is not well optimized, and probably it doesn't have new capabilities such as intelligent sensors, the use of threat intel, which is very important nowadays. You have to use threat intelligence to not only predict things, but also to try to be one step ahead of the attackers. If you see some trends, you can start to change your security strategy to protect against things that are actually coming into the later on. So it's very important to leverage threat intelligence feed, and we're going to talk more about that later on. The use of user and entity behavior analytics, which is a new, kind of not new, but is the youngest player within the Gartner Magic Quadrant, UAB. Is a way for organizations to build a profile of their resources, and based on deviations of the profile, the system identify suspicious activity. In the past, organizations were relying on IDS and IPS. So user and entity behavior analytics go way beyond the traditional IPS and IDS, because it looks for this profile activity. So if you think about how a credit card company works, they will trigger an alert to you via email or a call when they find a suspicious activity on our credit card. But how they know is a suspicious activity? Well, because they build a profile of your usage. So if you are buying things regularly in some stores in a specific location, they have your profile. They say, well, this guy, everything that he buys is usually on Amazon, and he buys also on their website. When he travels within Texas, or he goes to Washington. He really never goes to other locations, only those two locations. So if suddenly there is a very expensive purchase from New York, that might raise an alert, and I might want to send him an email just to confirm that that activity is legit or not. So this is the same approach that using entity behavior analytics utilize in your network. So for example, if the user Bob always log in from his laptop, and his laptop is a Windows 10 machine, and he's always access a SharePoint server, and he always access a file server, and that's pretty much what he does. If Bob suddenly logs on from UK and start accessing a different file server, a different SharePoint, and access different things, that's really a deviation on the user's behavior, and we should warn you about that. So that's a very important type of technology that can help you with detection, with your detection pillar within the secure posture. The last one is the response, which is certainly not the least, because once you detect, what you need to do is rapidly respond. And that's why it's very important for you to have an incident response process, but not only incident response process, but also tools to investigate those incidents.